Barbara Rhoades was not supposed to be the most talked-about figure in a film filled with Hollywood giants like Kirk Douglas and Henry Fonda. Yet her name is still whispered decades later because of a scene that no audience ever got to see. What began as a daring performance meant to bring humor to chaos turned into a vanished moment of cinema history, cut away before it could leave its true mark. To understand how this happened and why it still matters, we need to go back to the winter of 1970, when one of Hollywood's greatest directors took his only step into the Western genre, a Western that wasn't like the rest. When There Was a Crooked Man was released on Christmas Day in 1970, audiences expected another familiar story of sheriffs, outlaws, and dusty justice. The film was directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, a Hollywood legend best known for All About Eve, Suddenly Last Summer, and No Way Out. Yet this was his first and only Western, and he did not approach it with the same optimism or romanticism that had defined the genre for decades. Instead, he built a story that was steeped in corruption, cynicism, and irony. Kirk Douglas starred as Paris Pittman Jr., a slick outlaw who stole $500,000 in gold, betrayed his partners, and buried the treasure in a snake-infested desert. His capture landed him in a remote Arizona prison, overseen by Henry Fonda's character, Warden Woodward Lopeman. Unlike the cynical outlaw, Lopeman believed in rehabilitation and justice, and he was determined to test his reformist ideals on Pittman. This set the stage for a battle of wits, where each man tried to outthink the other, creating tension that defined the film. But what made There Was a Crooked Man unusual was not only its central duel. Mankiewicz filled the story with eccentric characters, aged outlaws, bitter con men, and naive prisoners, all inhabiting a prison built in the middle of Joshua Tree National Monument. The set, constructed in 7 weeks under brutal weather conditions, became more than scenery. It was a character itself, reflecting the harsh, unforgiving world where survival often meant compromise. The film was a revisionist Western, a new form that emerged in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Gone were the days of clear heroes and villains. Instead, everyone was crooked in their own way. Pittman, though a thief and murderer, became strangely likable because of his charm. Lopeman, though righteous, seemed foolish for believing in ideals that no longer held power in a cynical age. The lines blurred, and audiences were left questioning who was truly right. The cast of Misfits and the rise of Barbara Rhoades. To understand why Barbara Rhoades' lost scene is still remembered, we have to look at the company she kept in There Was a Crooked Man. Mankiewicz surrounded Kirk Douglas and Henry Fonda with a supporting cast that was deliberately odd, full of quirks that gave the prison life a tragicomic rhythm. Burgess Meredith played the Missouri Kid, an aging outlaw whose glory days were long behind him. Even in confinement, he clung to the memory of his past, refusing to surrender his identity. His refusal to remove a pair of underwear he had worn for 35 years became one of the film's strangest and funniest details, but it also symbolized stubborn pride that no punishment could erase. Hume Cronyn and John Randolph appeared as two con men whose bickering created some of the film's sharpest comic moments, a bitterly humorous reminder that loyalty among crooks often looks more like irritation than friendship. Warren Oates brought grit and menace to his role, while Michael Blodgett offered youthful swagger, contrasting sharply with the older prisoners. Each man represented a different angle of desperation, ambition, and delusion, contributing to a world where no one was fully innocent. And then there was Barbara Rhoades. Cast as Miss Jessie Brundage, a prim Victorian schoolteacher who finds herself inside the prison during a riot, she was not meant to embody strength or villainy. Instead, her character was written as comic relief, a woman so tightly wound and proper that when chaos ripped through her world, it tore down her defenses piece by piece. She was the symbol of order in a place built on disorder, and for that reason, her unraveling was always going to carry more weight than a simple gag. Rhoades, only in her early 30s at the time, brought an unusual blend of confidence and vulnerability to the role. Known for her comedic timing and striking presence, she was a natural fit for a film that thrived on irony and satire. Yet she was also asked to carry out one of its riskiest moments, a sequence that pushed far beyond the expectations of a traditional Western. This was no accident. By 1970, Hollywood was changing. Censorship codes had loosened, and directors were experimenting with darker, more explicit themes. Rhoades was prepared to meet those demands, even if it meant stepping into territory that few actresses of her generation would have dared to touch. What happened next would mark her career in ways she never anticipated. The infamous riot scene and the missing footage. The turning point of Barbara Rhodes's role came during the prison riot sequence, one of the film's most chaotic moments. In the version audiences saw, Miss Jessie Brundage, her prim and proper outfit already torn, stumbles through the turmoil until she is left in a corset, a single glove, and an expression of pure panic. It was slapstick comedy in the middle of violence, a quick reminder that in Mankiewicz's world, even the innocent could not escape humiliation. But this was only half the story. What was cut from the final print was a sequence far more daring. According to Rhoades herself, she had followed the director's instructions exactly as written. As the riot escalated, her clothing was to fall away piece by piece until nothing remained. She sprinted across the desert set completely nude, terrified but fully committed to the scene. She later joked that she had no problem being exposed in front of the crew, but in truth, the moment carried enormous weight. It was meant to be a satirical punchline about propriety stripped bare, both literally and figuratively. For Warner Brothers, however, it was a step too far. Even in 1970, with American cinema beginning to push boundaries, the image of a respected actress running unclothed across the desert in a mainstream Western was more than executives were willing to gamble on. They feared controversy, censorship battles, and damage to the film's already risky tone. The decision was made to cut the explicit footage, leaving only the suggestive fragments that made it to theaters. Still, traces of the scene survived. 2 promotional stills, one showing Rhoades topless, another capturing her mid-sprint, completely nude, escaped the cutting room floor and became legendary artifacts. For decades, they circulated among collectors, fueling speculation about what the uncut version might have meant for the film. Would it have cemented There Was a Crooked Man as one of the boldest revisionist westerns of its time, or would it have derailed the film entirely by pushing satire into farce? What remains undeniable is that Rhoades gave everything to the performance. She carried out exactly what was asked of her, only to watch her most daring work vanish before it reached the audience. Studio cuts, lost subplots, and the shadow over the film. Barbara Rhodes's cut scene wasn't the only victim of the studio's caution. Joseph L. Mankiewicz originally delivered a version of There Was a Crooked Man that ran around 165 minutes, but Warner Brothers demanded heavy trims. The studio feared that a nearly 3-hour Western, already filled with cynicism and black humor, would alienate audiences. As a result, entire subplots disappeared, character arcs were weakened, and one of Hollywood's finest actresses, Lee Grant, saw her role reduced to a blink-and-you-miss-it cameo. Grant's part had been conceived as a counterbalance to the film's male-dominated cast, a voice that could expose the hypocrisies of the men who populated Pittman's world. Losing her storyline stripped away an important perspective, leaving the narrative to lean more heavily on the interplay between Douglas and Fonda. Critics later noted that while the film was full of sharp ideas, it often felt unfocused, as though pieces of the puzzle were missing. They were right. Those pieces had been cut in the editing room. The decision to eliminate Rhodes's nude sequence was part of the same pattern. Mankiewicz, who had built his reputation on layered storytelling and biting satire, wanted to push boundaries. The studio, fearful of controversy, trimmed away the edges until the film was safer, though far less daring. What remained was still intelligent and provocative, but it no longer carried the same uncompromising vision that Mankiewicz had intended. The irony is that these cuts may have hurt the film more than the risks would have. Released on Christmas Day in 1970, There Was a Crooked Man struggled at the box office. Mainstream audiences were unsettled by its moral ambiguity and dark humor, while critics were split, some praising its intelligence, others condemning its uneven pacing. Had the full version been released, it might have earned a reputation as a fearless work ahead of its time. Instead, it became remembered for what was missing. For Barbara Rhoades, this meant that the most daring choice of her career was locked away, her willingness to embrace risk reduced to whispers and rumors. For Mankiewicz, it was a reminder that even the boldest directors could have their vision reshaped by studio compromise. The controversy, Barbara Rhoades' response, and what came after. The lost riot scene quickly became a source of fascination for film historians and fans alike. Even though the footage never reached theaters, the knowledge of its existence spread through interviews and the surviving stills. Barbara Rhoades herself confirmed years later that she had indeed performed the sequence exactly as scripted, shedding every layer of her Victorian costume until she sprinted across the desert completely nude. Her matter-of-fact recollection made the moment even more striking. For her, it had been a day's work, a chance to show her comedic range in an unconventional project. For audiences denied the chance to see it, the story became legend. It's important to remember that Rhoades was not the first choice for the role of Miss Jessie Brundage. Actress Eileen O'Neill had been approached but turned it down, uncomfortable with the script's demands. Rhoades accepted, fully aware of the risk, and leaned into the challenge. Her boldness caught the attention of Playboy, which reportedly offered her a pictorial inspired by the film's notorious cut. She declined, choosing instead to avoid being typecast or reduced to a sensational headline. That decision added to the intrigue, an actress willing to bear all for art, but not for glossy exposure. The controversy surrounding the cut scene never fully went away. To some, it was evidence of a studio unwilling to trust its audience. To others, it was proof that the filmmakers had miscalculated the balance between satire and spectacle. For Rhoades, it became both a point of pride and frustration. She had given everything to a role that could have defined her career, only for the key moment to be erased. Still, she remained gracious, often speaking of the film as a valuable experience and expressing admiration for her co-stars and the director. Meanwhile, the two promotional stills continued to surface, igniting speculation. Fans debated whether the uncut version would ever emerge from Warner Brothers archives. Each time the film was revisited, the conversation inevitably returned to Barbara Rhoades and the moment that almost was. Legacy, the crooked title, and why the missing scene still matters. More than 50 years have passed since There Was a Crooked Man first appeared in theaters, yet its legacy continues to spark debate. Much of that conversation is tied not only to its revisionist take on the Western, but also to what was lost along the way. Joseph L. Mankiewicz set out to make a film that stripped away illusions of morality in the Old West. By the end, even Henry Fonda's supposedly incorruptible warden abandons his ideals, escaping to Mexico with stolen fortune in hand. The message was clear. Everyone is crooked in their own way, and no one walks a straight path. In that sense, the title, borrowed from the nursery rhyme, was never meant to be playful. It was ironic, almost mocking, pointing to the deep flaws in every character. Kirk Douglas's Paris Pittman Jr. embodied greed. The prisoners displayed desperation and betrayal, and even the reformist warden gave in to temptation. Against this backdrop, Barbara Rhoades' lost scene fit perfectly. Her character's prim exterior was literally stripped away, a visual metaphor for the unraveling of social norms under pressure. Its removal did not just censor nudity, it blunted a powerful satirical stroke. The film's reception at the time was mixed. Time magazine dismissed it as old-timers' day at the ballpark, a cruel jab at its cast of seasoned actors. Audiences were unsettled by its cynicism and tonal shifts, unsure whether to laugh, recoil, or sympathize with the characters. And yet, those very qualities make the film feel modern today. Its refusal to paint heroes and villains in black and white, its willingness to embrace absurdity alongside tragedy, all point to a movie ahead of its time. Barbara Rhodes's missing scene has become a symbol of that legacy. It represents both the courage of an actress who took a risk and the timidity of a studio that backed away. It reminds us that cinema history is often shaped as much by what we never see as by what ends up on screen. In the crooked mile that the film mapped out, her unseen sprint remains one of the most haunting steps. Barbara Rhoades gave everything to a role that history almost forgot, and the scene that could have defined her career was locked away forever. What remains is a story of ambition, censorship, and the crooked compromises that shaped one of Hollywood's most unusual westerns. Do you think the film would have been remembered differently if Barbara's full scene had been left in? Share your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold tales from cinema history.